The story begins in a distant galaxy where the stars burned bright and the empires of aliens stretched across countless systems, and in this galaxy one truth was always repeated to every generation of young minds, that humans were long dead, wiped out in wars that consumed their homeworld and left nothing but ashes behind, and this truth had been taught for so many centuries that no one alive now even questioned it anymore. For humans were described as weak, reckless, and unable to survive the chaos of the Great Wars. The alien empire that now ruled the central sectors was strong and proud, and its leaders had grown comfortable with the idea that there was no one left to challenge their rule, and in their comfort they began to erase even the memory of humans, leaving them as little more than a warning tale for children who were told that foolish species always destroyed themselves. But far from the heart of this empire, on the very edge of the outer rim, one young alien officer found himself staring at a sky that refused to obey the lies he had been raised to believe. His patrol ship drifted silently through the emptiness of space, the sensors sweeping across dead rocks and silent moons, when suddenly the alarms began to blink, faint at first, almost too faint to notice, but quickly growing stronger until the sound filled the small control room with an uneasy hum. He turned his eyes to the viewport, expecting to see debris or some wandering pirate vessels, but what appeared in the blackness beyond the stars was neither small nor weak, for the void was filling with shapes so large and so numerous that they blotted out the starlight itself. At first he thought it must be a glitch, some false reading, but then the shadows resolved into forms, ships of immense size, ships with armor that shimmered like dark metal glass, ships that moved not like scavengers or raiders but like predators who had already chosen their prey. They formed in perfect lines, hundreds, then thousands, each sliding into position with a precision that was frightening in its silence, and as the officer watched with wide eyes he felt his chest tighten, because deep inside he already knew that this was not the work of pirates or wandering fleets. These were warships, an armada, gathering at the very edge of the galaxy as if they had been waiting there for centuries. He leaned closer to the comms, ordering the ship to record, his hands shaking as he transmitted the images back to his superiors. But even before the signals left his console a sound broke the silence, a voice, not alien, not metallic, but human, carrying across ancient radio frequencies that had not been heard in living memory. The voice was calm and strong, deep and steady, and it carried no fear as it spoke. "This is the fleet of humanity. We return." The officer froze, his blood running cold, for this was impossible, this was not something his mind could accept, and yet the evidence was before him. A sky filled with warships marked with symbols of Earth, symbols he had only ever seen in the oldest archives, symbols that his teachers had called lies, relics of a species that had perished long ago. His heart pounded as the voice repeated itself, and then the ships began to shift, their engines burning bright, their hulls cutting across the void with terrifying discipline, and the young officer realized that everything he had been taught, everything his empire believed, was about to crumble. He tried to send another warning, but the comms flickered and died, not broken but silenced, as if the humans had chosen to let him see only what they wanted him to see. The officer pressed his face against the glass, staring at the nearest ship, and his eyes widened as he caught sight of its markings, not just a symbol but a banner, the image of a blue and green world rising behind a silver shield, the emblem of Earth, glowing faintly as though it had never been forgotten. His throat tightened and he whispered to himself, though no one could hear. They were supposed to be gone. They were supposed to be extinct. Yet here they were, alive, powerful, and more frightening than any legend. The officer felt the weight of history pressing down on him as he remembered the old stories told by the elders, stories dismissed as myths, stories of humans who had never surrendered, humans who fought with a fury no empire could understand, humans who had been called dangerous not because of their weapons but because of their will to survive against all odds. And now that will was written in the sky before him, in the countless warships forming a wall of steel across the stars. He felt fear take root in his chest, not just for himself, but for his entire civilization, for if the humans had hidden all this time, if they had waited silently in the shadows, then perhaps extinction had never been their fate but their strategy. Perhaps they had been watching, waiting, and preparing for this very moment, and if that was true then the galaxy was about to change forever, for the humans had returned, and their armada filled the heavens. The alien empire that ruled the central stars did not react slowly when the first recordings of the mysterious fleet arrived, for even before the images reached the council chambers, whispers spread through the corridors of power like fire across dry grass. The first officials who saw the footage dismissed it, claiming it was some trick of pirates or a coalition of Outer Rim rebels, but those with sharper eyes felt their blood turn cold, because no pirate fleet in history had ever moved with such perfect order, and no rebel group could have built warships of that scale without being noticed. The council summoned its admirals, and in the dark chambers of the Empire's capital world the leaders gathered, their voices low and urgent. One after another, the generals tried to explain the sight away, but the older counselors, those who remembered ancient stories, sat silent, their eyes heavy with dread, for they recognized the symbols painted across those dark ships, symbols that no living alien had dared reproduce for centuries. They knew those banners belonged to a species that should not exist anymore. They belonged to humans. The official history of the galaxy told a different story. It claimed humans had burned themselves out during the Great Collapse, fighting endless wars until their fleets shattered and their homeworld was left in ruins. Children in schools were shown holograms of scorched earth, spinning silently in the void, proof that humanity had destroyed itself. Generations had grown up believing this truth, mocking the idea that humans were ever as dangerous as the old records described. A species too fragile to survive its own violence, that was the common phrase used by lecturers in universities, and the Empire was proud to repeat it, for it allowed them to believe that their rule would never be challenged by those shadows of the past. Yet in the chambers of power, the elders remembered something different. They remembered how their own ancestors had spoken in hushed voices about the wars with humans, how every battle had been costly, how humans refused to surrender even when outnumbered 100 to 1, and how they adapted faster than any enemy ever known. They remembered the fear. One elder finally spoke, his voice trembling as he rose before the council. "You do not understand what you are seeing," he said. "You believe them weak because that is what you were told. But if these are truly human ships, then everything you think you know is a lie. Humanity was never weak. Humanity was dangerous." His words were met with laughter from the younger counselors, who rolled their eyes and dismissed him as a relic, a paranoid mind still trapped in ancient myths. But the elder's warning settled heavily over the chamber, for even those who mocked him could not deny the truth of the recordings. The ships were real, and they carried symbols of Earth. The admirals debated sending a welcoming envoy, perhaps an attempt to learn more, but the younger officers argued that it was best to strike first before the mysterious fleet could grow stronger. One even declared proudly that their empire's armadas were unmatched and could crush any intruder. But their arrogance cracked when reports arrived from the scouts who had been dispatched to approach the unknown fleet. The scouts never returned. Their signals vanished without a trace, no explosions, no debris, no cries for help. It was as if they had been erased from existence. Panic stirred in the chamber, whispers rising into shouts, for this was not the way pirates fought. This was the way a disciplined power tested its enemy, erasing scouts while revealing nothing about itself. Across the Empire, rumors spread quickly. Soldiers in the barracks repeated the words from the intercepted broadcast, words spoken in the clear, confident tones of a human voice. "We were never gone. We watched. We waited. And now, we return." Those words spread faster than fire, carried in secret conversations, repeated in crowded marketplaces, whispered in the ears of frightened children who suddenly realized that their teachers had lied to them. For the first time in centuries, the name of humanity was not spoken with mockery but with fear. In the homes of the Empire's core worlds, citizens stared at the sky with unease, wondering if those massive warships would one day appear above their own planets. The younger generation laughed at the rumors, but even they felt a chill in their bones when they looked into the night sky, because deep down every alien felt the same truth pressing against their minds. The universe had grown too quiet for too long, and now something had awakened. The elders in villages spoke of the human oath, the old belief that humans never truly surrendered but always found a way to rise again, no matter how many centuries passed. The Empire had silenced those stories for so long that most thought them extinct like the species itself. But the sudden appearance of the fleet breathed new life into them, and fear spread faster than the Empire could contain. Back in the council chambers, arguments broke into chaos. Should they prepare their fleets? Should they attempt negotiation? Should they broadcast warnings to every world under their control? The leaders could not agree, for the younger ones demanded war while the older ones whispered that war with humans was suicide. Then came a final transmission from the edge of the rim, a last desperate message from a ship before its signal was lost. The officer's voice was shaking as he spoke. "They are everywhere. They move like shadows. We cannot escape. If this is humanity, then we are already too late." And then the line went dead. The chamber fell silent. No one laughed anymore. The arrogance that had filled their voices earlier was gone, replaced by a heavy, choking fear. For the first time in living memory, the Empire faced an enemy they could not understand, an enemy who should not exist, and as the great fleets of the aliens prepared to move, the leaders realized that they were not hunting ghosts, they were waking a power that had been waiting in silence for centuries. Humanity was not extinct. Humanity was returning. And the galaxy would never be the same again. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath when the first human transmission echoed across the stars, reaching every listening post, every warship, and every distant colony within the alien empire. The message was not long, it was not wrapped in threats or boasts, yet it carried a weight that pressed into the hearts of those who heard it. The words were simple, calm, and unshaken. We were never gone. We watched. We waited. And now, we return. To many aliens who had grown up believing that humans were only a myth, the voice was a curiosity, something to laugh at, perhaps even a trick designed by rebels. But to those who had studied the past, to the elders who remembered whispers from the wars long ago, the voice was a nightmare come alive, for it carried the exact tone described in the old stories, the tone of humans who spoke with certainty even when outnumbered. It was a tone that said they would not stop until their enemies broke. Across the Empire, the message replayed again and again, sometimes caught on official channels, sometimes stolen by smugglers who carried it into the black markets of hidden moons, and every time it spread, the fear spread with it. On distant colony worlds, families gathered to listen, some laughing, others pale and silent, and more than once someone whispered, "If they have returned, then no one is safe." The Empire tried to silence the words, blocking the frequencies, hunting down anyone caught spreading them, but it was no use, for the message had already burned itself into the collective memory of the galaxy, and once words are spoken into the stars, they cannot be silenced again. The Alien Council finally met again, desperate to decide how to respond, but even as they argued, new reports arrived from the outer rim. The human fleet was no longer content to remain at the very edge of space. They had moved closer, not attacking, not destroying, but surrounding entire star systems with precision that was terrifying to watch. One planet awoke to find itself completely encircled by sleek, dark ships whose weapons glowed faintly against the void, yet not a single shot was fired. Instead, the human ships waited in silence, holding their positions as if daring the Empire to make the first move. Citizens panicked, governments begged for protection, and the Empire's admirals demanded answers, for they could not understand this strategy. Why surround but not attack? Why reveal such overwhelming power only to sit and wait? The truth gnawed at the minds of the alien leaders, though none dared say it aloud. The humans did not need to fire. Their presence alone was a weapon. By showing their power but withholding their hand, they created fear greater than destruction itself. For when a city is destroyed, the survivors know what has been lost, but when an enemy only watches, the imagination of the victim begins to destroy itself, inventing horrors worse than any reality. And that was exactly what began to happen across the Empire. Entire worlds fell into chaos not because humans attacked them, but because the people feared what might happen next. Meanwhile, aboard one of the massive alien dreadnoughts stationed near the rim, a young officer stared at his screen as the humans transmitted a second message. This time, it was not broadcast to the galaxy at large but directed specifically at the alien empire's military command. The officer superior played the message before the Council of Admirals, and as the words unfolded, the chamber fell silent. The human voice said, "Your empire taught its people that we were gone, that we had been erased. That was the lie you needed to sleep at night. But we do not fade. We endure. We adapt. We return." The voice paused, and then, colder than before, it added, "You still believe this is your galaxy. It is not. It never was. It belongs to those strong enough to hold it." The admirals sat frozen, some enraged, others visibly afraid, but none could deny the precision of the message. It was not a declaration of war, yet it was not peace either. It was a reminder, a shadow drawn across the Empire's pride. The younger admirals slammed their fists against the table, shouting that humanity was only bluffing, that the fleet must be destroyed before it grew any larger. But the elder among them raised a trembling hand and said, "Do you not see? This is not their largest fleet. This is only their hand extended. If you strike it, you will find the fist waiting behind it." His words chilled the chamber, for in the old histories it was said that humans rarely revealed all their strength at once. They attacked like predators, showing only enough force to test their prey, and once the prey showed its weakness, the real strike would fall. Back on the rim, alien citizens trapped under the shadow of the Armada began to see strange signs. Human ships sent small drones drifting through orbit, but the drones did not attack. They scanned, they watched, and then they returned to their carriers. Some aliens swore they could see humans themselves, shadows moving in the windows of the ships, though none could be certain. A sense of inevitability settled over these worlds. They did not know when the strike would come, only that it could come at any moment, and this waiting was worse than any bombardment. In the capital, the Empire's ruler demanded a response from the council, but no answer came. Every option seemed like a path to disaster. If they attacked, they might awaken the full fury of a species said to be unbreakable. If they surrendered or tried to negotiate, they would admit weakness, and weakness was death in a galaxy ruled by power. So they hesitated, and in that hesitation, humanity's silence became louder than any weapon. The story of humans being extinct was already broken. No one in the Empire believed it anymore. Not the soldiers, not the civilians, not even the rulers. Humanity had spoken, humanity had surrounded their worlds, and humanity had done all this without firing a single shot. And in the silence that followed, the galaxy realized a terrifying truth: extinction had never claimed mankind. It had only hidden them, and now that they had returned, the question was no longer whether they existed but what they intended to do next. The skies were filled with their ships, and every alien heart knew that the waiting itself was part of the war, for it was breaking them long before the first shot was fired. The human fleet did not remain still forever. After weeks of silent formation along the rim, the first movements began, and they were not small, random shifts as one might expect from a restless armada, but vast coordinated maneuvers that shook the very balance of the Empire's military. Entire squadrons vanished from the edge of the galaxy in a blink, their drives bending light around them as they leapt through space with a speed that no alien technology could track. Hours later, reports flooded in from multiple sectors. Human warships had appeared near populated systems, near fortified stations, and even along major trade routes. What terrified the Empire most was not that these fleets appeared, but that they appeared everywhere at once, as if humanity had studied every weakness, every blind spot, and every vulnerable artery of galactic power. In the outer colonies, alien citizens awoke to find the skies above their worlds covered in dark silhouettes of warships, their hulls gleaming like obsidian blades under distant suns. Yet still the humans did not fire. They only held position, silent watchers in the void. Some of the braver citizens, or perhaps the more foolish, attempted to broadcast messages to the mysterious ships. They begged for mercy, offered promises of loyalty, even curses, but not one message received a reply. The silence was worse than a declaration of war, because it made every mind imagine its own doom. What did the humans want? Why were they here? And why had they chosen now, after centuries of absence, to return? The alien council grew desperate. Their fleets mobilized, but each time they attempted to intercept the human warships would vanish into the dark before contact could be made. It was as though they were ghosts, striking into sight and then disappearing at will, leaving the Empire's admirals red-faced and humiliated. In one famous incident, an alien fleet of 200 ships cornered what appeared to be a lone human cruiser. Certain of their victory, they advanced, weapons hot and targeting systems locked. Yet the moment the first shot was fired, the cruiser split apart, not destroyed, but unfolding like a shadow, revealing a dozen more ships hidden inside its structure. And then, before the aliens could react, an entire human battle group emerged from behind them, cutting through their formation without firing a single weapon. The alien fleet broke and scattered, not because they were destroyed but because they realized how easily they could have been. Fear did the work of 1,000 missiles. Meanwhile, whispers began spreading across the galaxy that the humans had not simply survived in hiding but had advanced far beyond anything the Empire could imagine. Their ships did not move like normal craft, they folded through space, sliding from one point to another in the blink of an eye, a maneuver no alien scientist could explain. Their weapons, though rarely used, were rumored to be devastating. Some scouts who survived claimed to have seen a single human strike erase an asteroid fortress larger than a moon. Others told of strange energy fields that bent attacks away, as though the very void itself protected the humans. Whether these stories were true or exaggerated by terror, no one could tell, but the effect was the same. Panic spread like wildfire. On the Central Worlds, the Empire tried to calm its citizens by broadcasting messages of strength, claiming that the human fleet was nothing more than a desperate remnant, a shadow of the past clinging to myths. But the people were not convinced. Too many saw the truth with their own eyes, and too many heard the recordings of that human voice. Rebellion stirred on the edges of the Empire, small groups of aliens who saw the human return as an omen that the Empire's rule was ending. Old enemies of the Empire rose up, emboldened by the idea that if humans could return from extinction, then perhaps they too could rise again. The galaxy itself seemed to shift under the shadow of humanity's silence. And then, at last, the humans chose to act. It began without warning. A single alien fortress world, a planet-ringed citadel believed to be invincible, found itself the target of human attention. The skies above it filled with dark shapes, massive human dreadnoughts that blotted out the sun. The defenders scrambled, raising shields, arming weapons, preparing for a fight they believed might last months. Yet the battle lasted only seconds. From one of the human flagships, a single beam of light erupted, not fiery, not chaotic, but focused, calm, and impossibly bright. It struck the planet's defenses, and in an instant the fortress vanished, not shattered into pieces, not burning in flames, but erased in silence, leaving nothing but drifting dust where once a mighty citadel had stood. The galaxy watched in horror. Billions across countless worlds saw the recordings replayed, and none could believe what they had seen. The humans had fired once, and an indestructible stronghold that had stood for centuries was gone as if it had never existed. But then came the most chilling part: the humans did not continue their attack. They did not move against the fleet guarding the fortress, they did not bombard the planet below. They simply sent a transmission, short and sharp, repeating the same words across every channel. "This is your warning." Those 4 words struck deeper than any weapon. For in them lay the terrible truth: the humans had power beyond imagination, yet they chose not to use it fully. They had demonstrated their strength, but also their restraint. It was a reminder that destruction was not their goal, not yet. Their silence was strategy, their patience was weapon, and their single shot had shown the Empire that resistance was hopeless. Across the Empire, morale collapsed. Soldiers refused to fight, officers questioned their orders, civilians began preparing for surrender even before a demand was made. And still, the Council could not decide what to do, for every path led into the same shadow. If they attacked, they would be erased. If they waited, fear would rot their empire from the inside. If they surrendered, they admitted to every citizen that the humans were stronger. The humans had turned the very concept of war into a game of patience, and the galaxy was already losing. And high above it all, the Armada in the skies remained silent, unmoving, eternal, as though the ships themselves were not machines of steel but the watchful eyes of a species that had returned from extinction not to conquer, but to remind the universe of a truth it had tried so hard to forget. Humanity endures, humanity adapts, humanity returns. The destruction of the fortress world did more than erase a single stronghold of the alien empire. It shattered the illusion of safety that had kept their people obedient for centuries. News of the event traveled faster than light, carried not only by official channels but by smugglers, traders, and frightened civilians who had seen the recording with their own eyes. Every replay of that moment spread like a disease across the stars, the single beam of light carving its way into the minds of billions. For generations, The Empire had boasted that its fortress was impenetrable, a symbol of unbreakable power. Now it was gone, erased in an instant, and no amount of propaganda could change the truth. Humanity had struck once, and with that single strike, they had undone the Empire's greatest symbol. But the most terrifying part was not the destruction, it was what came after. The human fleet did not advance, did not attack the nearby alien warships, did not bombard the cities below. They simply waited, hanging in the skies like a silent wall of judgment. And then came the transmission, for words carried into every corner of the galaxy. This is your warning. The simplicity of the message cut deeper than any weapon, for it carried no demand, no negotiation, no detail of what would come next. It was not a threat, it was a promise, and that promise echoed in the silence of their ships. On the alien capital world, the Council of Rulers collapsed into chaos. Younger voices still screamed for war, shouting that they could not bow before a ghost species, that their fleets numbered in the millions, that they could grind down the humans if they struck hard enough. Yet even as they roared their confidence, their hands shook, and their eyes betrayed the truth. They had seen the fortress vanish. They knew what one strike had done. The older counselors, those who remembered the legends, spoke with grim certainty. "You do not understand," one elder whispered to the chamber. "That was not their strongest weapon. That was only enough to frighten us. If they wished to destroy us, they already would have." His words fell heavy across the room, and though many dismissed him, the silence that followed proved that every heart believed it. The admirals struggled to rally their forces, but morale was collapsing faster than they could control. Soldiers refused orders, entire crews abandoned their posts, and whispers of mutiny spread through the lower ranks. Across the colonies, riots broke out as civilians demanded protection their rulers could not provide. Some worlds even attempted to declare independence, believing that if they stood alone, the humans might spare them. The Empire, once united in fear of losing control, was fracturing before humanity had even raised a second weapon. The humans had turned restraint into their sharpest blade, and with it they cut deeper than fire and steel ever could. Meanwhile, reports began to surface of direct encounters between humans and alien scouts. Survivors spoke in hushed voices of strange new technologies. They described human ships that bent space like water, sliding through reality as if the void itself obeyed them. They spoke of weapons that did not explode or burn but erased, leaving no trace behind. And most unsettling of all, they spoke of the humans themselves. They were no longer exactly as the old records described. They were taller, sharper, their bodies strengthened by something unknown, their eyes glowing faintly as if carrying the fire of distant stars. Some whispered that humanity had not just survived in hiding, but had evolved, reshaping themselves to endure the centuries in exile. If that was true, then what stood before the galaxy now was not the humanity of the past, but something greater, something stronger, something prepared. The Empire's intelligence divisions tried desperately to uncover the truth, sending spies and drones to infiltrate the Armada. None returned. The humans allowed no eyes inside their fleet, and yet they gave just enough glimpses to keep the galaxy guessing. They wanted the aliens to see their warships drifting silently above worlds, wanted them to know how close the blade hovered, but they revealed nothing of their true size or number. Were these thousands of ships only a fragment of a larger force? Had humanity rebuilt its armies in secret, scattered across hidden corners of the galaxy? No one knew, and it was this not knowing that drove fear deeper than certainty ever could. On the streets of the Empire's cities, the ordinary citizens no longer laughed at the idea of humans. They no longer mocked the old legends told by their grandparents. Instead, they spoke of humanity with the kind of reverence once reserved for gods and demons, a force too vast to fight, too patient to outlast. Markets closed, trade routes fell silent, and the economy of the Empire began to tremble as fear spread through every layer of society. For the first time in memory, the people no longer believed their rulers could protect them. And all the while, the human fleet moved closer. Not with reckless charges or open battles, but with steady, deliberate steps. Each new world they appeared above was not attacked but surrounded, cut off from communication, forced to stare into the sky and wait. The waiting became unbearable. Entire planets surrendered before a shot was fired, sending messages of submission into the void, begging humanity for mercy. The humans did not reply, and their silence became its own kind of answer. The Empire tried one last act of defiance. A vast fleet, the largest they could gather in centuries, was assembled near the heart of their territory, tens of thousands of warships meant to prove to their citizens that they still held power. The fleet burned bright against the void, a wall of steel and fire prepared for the ultimate test. And then, in the distance, the human armada appeared. Not in fragments this time, not scattered squadrons striking from shadows, but as a single vast formation stretching farther than any alien eye could measure. The two fleets faced each other across the emptiness of space, and the galaxy held its breath. The Empire's admirals gave the order to prepare weapons, but even as they shouted, their hearts knew the truth. For in that moment, it was clear that the humans did not need to fight for victory. They had already won. The sight of their armada, endless and silent, was enough to break the courage of an entire empire. And still, the humans did not fire. They only watched. They only waited. And in that silence, every alien heart knew the truth. Humanity was not here to conquer. Humanity was here to remind them. Extinction had been a lie. Defeat had been a dream. The galaxy had forgotten, but now it would remember, and the memory would never fade again. The skies above the Empire's gathered fleet burned with tension, yet not a single weapon fired. On one side stood the greatest force the alien empire had ever assembled, ships stretching for thousands of kilometers, their guns primed, their shields flaring with power. On the other side loomed the human armada, vast and unyielding, a black tide of steel that seemed to drink in the starlight itself. They did not move, they did not speak. They only hovered in perfect silence as though the void itself had bent to their will. Across both fleets, crews held their breath, waiting for the first shot, waiting for the war that would decide the future of the galaxy. Yet it never came. Instead, the humans spoke. The transmission cut through every channel, overriding even the encrypted lines of the Empire's command ships. A voice filled the silence, calm and unwavering, the same voice that had first declared their return. "We did not come to conquer," the voice said. "We did not come to erase. We came to remind you." The words echoed through the chambers of the council, through the decks of the fleet, through the homes of billions. The admiral of the alien armada clenched his fists, shouting that the humans were liars, that this was manipulation, yet even he could not deny the fear in his own voice. The humans had shown power beyond imagination, and yet they had not unleashed it. That choice carried more weight than 1,000 battles. The human commander continued, his voice low and steady. "Your empire told its children that humanity was gone. You told them we had burned ourselves away. But here we stand, stronger, smarter, watching while you grew arrogant in our absence. You believed extinction was our fate, but extinction was only your lie." Across the galaxy, billions listened, some in awe, some in terror, and all of them unable to look away. The silence between his sentences seemed heavier than any weapon, and when he spoke again, the words struck like thunder. "We endured. We adapted. We prepared. And now we return, not as ghosts, but as a reminder that humanity never fades." On the alien flagship, the ruler of the Empire sat pale and shaking, their hands gripping the arms of the throne-like chair. Advisors begged for an order, attack, retreat, surrender, but no order came. How could they? No strategy made sense. To attack would invite annihilation, to retreat would invite collapse, to surrender would invite shame. They were trapped in a cage of silence built not by weapons but by fear, and that cage was stronger than any prison. Around them, younger officers muttered in anger, but none dared raise their voice against the truth before their eyes. The humans had made the entire empire a prisoner without firing a shot. Then came the final revelation. Across the skies, the human fleet shifted. Not forward into attack, not backward into retreat, but outward, splitting into countless divisions that stretched across the galaxy in perfect symmetry. Worlds once thought safe now found themselves shadowed by human ships, and trade routes that had once carried the lifeblood of the Empire were now silent, blocked by vessels that drifted like black guardians in the void. The message was clear: the humans could be everywhere, at any time, and no world was beyond their reach. The Alien Council demanded to know what humanity wanted. What price would make them leave? What demand would satisfy their return? The human commander answered, his words slow and heavy. "We want nothing. We are not here to take. We are here to remind the galaxy what it forgot. Humanity was never weak. Humanity was never broken. And humanity will never be extinct. You will tell your children this truth. You will carve it into your histories. You will look to the sky and remember that the Armada waits. That is all we ask." The words fell like a shadow across the Empire. For the first time, rulers who had laughed at the myths of Earth now bowed their heads in silence, realizing that the old stories were not only true but far smaller than the reality. The humans had not come to enslave them, not to strip their worlds, not to demand tribute or rule. They had come only to remind them of a truth far more terrifying, that somewhere in the galaxy, humanity endured, watching with patient eyes, ready to rise whenever it was forgotten. On the outer colonies, where panic had once ruled, silence now settled. Citizens stood in their streets, looking up at the human ships above them, knowing that they could be destroyed in an instant and yet spared. That mercy became heavier than destruction, for it was not kindness, it was a warning. Across the Empire's military, soldiers who had once cursed humanity now whispered their name with reverence, not as an enemy, but as something greater, something untouchable. Humanity had stepped beyond the role of conqueror. They had become legend. When at last the human fleet began to withdraw, it was not in retreat but in silent control. They moved as one, slipping back into the darkness of the void, vanishing as quickly as they had come. Yet their absence did not bring relief. It brought only deeper unease. For every alien knew that the humans were still out there, unseen, waiting. And that was the most terrifying part of all, because the galaxy now understood that extinction had never been their fate. It had been their strategy. They had hidden in the shadows of time, sharpening themselves, building their strength, waiting for the moment to return, not to destroy, but to remind. On the alien capital, the ruler finally addressed the people, their voice trembling as they admitted what no leader had dared say before. "Humanity is not extinct," they declared. "Humanity is eternal." The word spread through every world, every colony, every listening post, and with them spread the knowledge that the galaxy had changed forever. The humans had left their mark not with conquest but with memory, and that memory was carved into the stars. And so the Armada that had once filled the skies passed back into the shadows, but their presence lingered in every heart, in every fearful glance at the night sky, in every story told to every child. Humanity had returned, not as victims, not as conquerors, but as a force that could never be erased. The galaxy had been warned. The galaxy had been reminded. And the galaxy would never forget again.